Okay, so today we're going to look at a bit more of an accurate startup procedure for the X-Plane 737-800X, the ZiboMod 737. I've recorded previous videos where I've looked at the functional side of doing things. Today we're going to be a bit more accurate about going through the various procedures. So take it from cold and dark, going through step by step, explaining as we go, and get as far as taking off. So we're not going to fly a full flight plan, but we're just going to have a quick look at and see what we can do. So we go inside the aircraft. First things first, we're going to go and let the ground service crew on. So we can say start service crews on the ground. This is in the AVTAB tablet. And you can hear things happening at the back of the aeroplane. So that's the hoovers and the crew coming on. So then once we've done that, we can go overhead. And first thing we're going to do is switch the batteries on. So that's the switch up here, and that lights up a load of things. If you close the guard on it, essentially if you close the guard it switches it on anyway. Next thing we're going to do is going to connect the ground power. So if we go back into the tablet, go to ground services, we can say GPU connect in here, and then in corresponding with that, so that's simulating plugging the hardware into the aircraft underneath, and then to correspond with that we will go and turn the ground power on inside the aircraft here, and that does the crossfeed automatically to the ground power for us. So the aircraft is taking its electricity supply from the ground power. Next thing we do is up overhead we go and turn the IRS system to NAV for both left and right systems, and we change the status to show us how many minutes left until it aligns. So the inertial navigation system uses gyros, and it takes a good few minutes for them to stabilize and to calibrate themselves. Okay, so next thing we go and do is come down and we can go and turn on the window heaters. As soon as you've got ground power, there's various orders you can do things in, and different airlines tend to have their own procedures as far as I can tell. So it can vary quite a lot, or it might be down to the crew themselves to have their own flow of how they go around the switches to do things. The next thing we might do is go and stop the ground services. So again, this is just simulating the kinds of things that would be going on. So we can say stop the ground services and you'll hear the sound die away. We can start the flight leg and you'll hear people starting to get on. It's just, you know, to give you the atmosphere in the simulator, I guess. Next thing we're going to do is go and program the FMC. So we come into the FMC, we go to position initialization, we go to, it's saying nav data out of date in the scratchpad. That's because I don't have up-to-date Navigraph data. So I clear that and I can go to the next page from here, and that will show me the GPS coordinates from the GPS system. And then I can go to previous page and I can slot those into the IRS position. Then I can put the reference airport. We're at Gatwick, so EGKK. I think I'm on gate number 27, or parking bay number 27, whatever you want to call it. So then we can go and program our route. So EGKK, because we put it in as our reference airport, is already in the scratchpad. So I can just go and select origin and it will transfer it across from me, from the scratchpad to the origin. So let's go and invent a route. We're going to fly from Gatwick maybe to Edinburgh, EGPH, for example. We can give ourselves a flight number, so AB123, we're just making something up. And then we can go to performance initialization. So the first thing it wants us to put in is the gross weight of the aircraft. So if we go and look back in the tablet, we can look in fuel weight and balance, and look in payload, and it will tell us that the gross weight of the aircraft is 100,907 pounds. So we need to divide that by 1,000 to type it into the FMC, so it's 100.9. So 100.9 goes into there. Next we give it how many reserves we want. This is thousands of pounds of fuel in reserve in case we needed to divert to an alternative airport. And cost index. So this is the result of a formula that tells the aircraft how aggressively it can accelerate and how aggressively it can climb. So cost index we'll put in 50. I think it's up to 200. cruise altitude. So say we were going to fly at 25,000 feet, we could put in flight level 250 because the flight levels times 100 are the feet. Execute that, and then we can go to the N1 limit, and then we can leave all of that stock. We might want to put in selected air temperature versus the outside air temperature, but we're going to ignore that. Takeoff 5-degree flap, which will then calculate the rotation speeds for us, so we can just transfer those across. We can also put in the centre of gravity, so if we go and look on the tablet, we can see the centre of gravity is 19.7%. That's based on the fuel we've got loaded and the passengers we've got on board. So 19.7. So let's go back into here. 19.7. Okay. And then we can go to departure next. Oh, before we do that, let's go back into there, go to takeoff. Departure, oh sorry, takeoff. Set a trim. When we set the centre of gravity, I almost forgot this, you get a trim calculated of 4.5. So if we go back to where the pilot's sitting and look down at the trim, you can see the needle here is on about 4.8 at the moment. So I'm just going to roll the trim wheel back to put it on 4.5. So what that essentially does is balances the elevators prior to takeoff, so the plane won't balloon around on the way down the runway, so it'll be well balanced before it even gets into the air. So we go to departure. We're going to take off on runway 26 left from Gatwick. We'll just pick a SID at random. A standard instrument departure, that stands for. So it's your first few waypoints basically as soon as you leave the ground. Route. So we can click on route and we can activate that route and execute it. We could even go as far as programming in the departure. So when we arrive at Edinburgh, EGPH, we can go and click on arrival options here. We could say we want to come in on runway 6. Again, these choices would normally be made either in flight or based on the weather if it's not a very long flight. But anyway, we'll go and choose a standard approach route to get into there as well and press execute. Now, if we go and have a look, we need to make sure there are no discrepancies or discontinuities, sorry, in the flight plan, and there are. So normally you'd have more waypoints to insert. So all I've got at the moment is the standard instrument departure waypoints, which get as far as ADMAG, and then I've got the standard approach route waypoints, which start at Haven. So I've got nothing in between, and obviously it's expecting me to at least have put something in between. But I can actually correct for that and say I want to move Haven up to there. So I've closed the gap, and I can execute that, which is fine to do. It's not a problem. And that's pretty much the flight plan done. So after programming the FMC, the next thing we might do is go and program the MCP, the mode control panel. So that's this panel up here that controls the autopilot. So we know we're taking off runway 27, did I say? We can check that. If we go and previous page on here. Does it appear on here? Departure. Oh, let's move the view slightly, the control stick's in the way. Departure from, yeah, we're at 26L. So just to, we could look up the exact angle of the runway, but we're just going to put 260 in, okay? So we'll spin the heading round to 260. The course is already on 260, because I did a flight similar to this earlier today. We could preset the target airspeed for the auto throttle to 220. We could say at the moment we're going to looking to climb to 6,000 feet, which is probably about right. But again, you would be referring accurately to your standard instrument departure flight plan, and you would program in your initial altitude on climb out, and the tower would probably tell you it as well, to be honest. Turn the flight directors on. So there's two parts to the system. If you're not aware what the flight directors are, there's the computer that's kind of trying to decide what the aeroplane should do next, and then there's the computer that actually controls the aeroplane. So the flight director is showing you on, it will show you on the screens what the aeroplane wants to do, if that makes sense. So if you have the autopilot on, it will be following what the flight director wants to do. But you can watch what the flight director wants to do without having the autopilot on, if that makes sense. Okay, so back up above, we can go and switch on the yaw dampers. We can switch the fuel pumps on. So I've only got fuel in the wing tanks. We can turn the fasten seatbelt signs on. We can turn the hydraulic pumps on. So we'll go and switch all this stuff on. We can set the cabin pressure for cruising altitude. So we said 25,000 feet, I think, didn't we? So this is obviously going to pre-arm the cabin to be heated and pressurized to the correct amount for the altitude we've set. We can switch the anti-collision lights on while we're here, and we can finally start the APU. So we switch it to on, we get a low pressure light, and then we hold it on start for a few seconds. And as you hold it on start, you'll see the needle on the exhaust gas temperature here started to move. This is the exhaust gas temperature of the auxiliary power unit itself. So it will climb up to about 8 and then fall back towards 4. When it's stabilized and it's up and running, the center light on the bus transfer will illuminate. So let's zoom in and see that happen. Just waiting for it, it takes a few seconds. Here it comes. So now we can transfer power to the auxiliary power unit. So we switch these two inner switches downwards. So we are now generating electricity from the auxiliary power unit, and we're using that to power the aircraft. We can now turn the APU bleed on. So if I go and look back over here, we can see APU bleed on, and you will see the pressure rising up towards about 40. We can disconnect the ground power as well while we're at it, because we're now using the APU for the electricity. Notice that didn't do anything on this switch, because that's already been disabled when I switched the crossfeed to the APU. So what this really relates to in the simulator is going over to ground services and telling the guy outside to pull the plug. Because there's actually there's a physical cable hanging out of the bottom of the aeroplane. We can go and talk to the passengers if we're the pilot. So we could go, I think if we go in,
Before we can move the aircraft,
you can still hear things going on, so we'll just wait for them. While we're waiting for them, we'll go to PA system and we can do the captain's welcome, which again is just doing a nice little simulation.
Good afternoon, folks. From the cockpit, I'd like to welcome you on board. We're ready up front. Everybody's closed up outside.
So while he's busy yabbering on, we are going to go back into the tablet and we're going to plan our pushback. So we can go into ground services and we can go to Better Pushback, which is a plugin that integrates with the ZiboMod 737, and we can pre-plan our pushback. So we are on this gate and we want to be pushed back perhaps to here. So we can say I want aeroplane to be pushed to there, and then I'll press enter.
Ground to cockpit. Plan acknowledged. Call me through the menu when you're ready.
Okay. So then we go back into the tablet and we say actually request the pushback.
Cockpit. Tow is driving up.
So we just wait for that to happen. And if we keep an eye out outside, here he comes. And he'll reverse in and connect to the aeroplane, and we'll get a call from him in a moment. It's just a waiting game now, really. We're waiting for the truck to come in. Should we turn some lights on? It's a bit dim, isn't it? This should have been kind of one of the early steps, actually. I think let's put them on bright so we can really see what we're doing. So this is a floodlight. You can also light up the panels themselves independently. So yeah, we'll just wait for the tug to go in. If we go and look from outside, we can see what he's doing. So what this truck will do is clamp around the front wheel.
All doors and hatches are closed, ready to connect.
Yeah, he'll reverse past the front wheel, fold a clamp around it and lift the front of the aircraft into the air. And when he's done that, he will ask for us to engage or to disengage the parking brake so he can push the aircraft along. So you'll see some clamps if we look carefully down there, squeezing onto the tyre. And you can now see, if you look carefully, the aircraft is lifting into the air. So the next thing he will do is ask us to release the parking brake, which is this lever here.
Connected and bypass pin inserted. Release parking brake.
So we release the parking brake.
Starting pushback, and you may start engines.
Okay. So we're going to start engine number 2 first. We switch the engine starter knob up here to GRD. And if we look on the display down here, we can see the N2 percentage for engine number 2. This is the gas turbine, is climbing up towards, and it will get to about 26%, I think, 25%. And then it will stop. And that's at the point we have to increase the throttle to idle. So 22, 23, 24, 25. We increase the throttle for engine number 2 to idle, and it accelerates past 25%. The exhaust gas temperature for engine number 2 is raising, and now you can see the N1 number is coming up. N1 is the turbofan speed. Again, it's a percentage of nominal, so 100% being nominal. If we look up above us, the starter will roll back to auto all on its own, and it's just done it. So we can go and do engine number 1 now. So we switch GRD. We can see the N2, the gas turbine, speed is increasing. As again, percentage of nominal. We wait for it to get to 25, and then we can advance the throttle for engine number 1 to idle. 23, 24, 25, advance to idle, it accelerates past. You can see the fuel flow increasing as well. So here comes the exhaust gas temperature of engine number 1, and the N1, the fan speed, is coming up. There's a gearbox between the gas turbine and the fan. Okay, so we'll see that happen up here as well, and that's done.
Operation complete. Set parking brake.
Okay, so we set our parking brake, and now we go and look back up above our head.
Disconnecting tows. Stand by.
We can now transfer power to the engines. So we flick the 2 outer switches on the bus transfer, and that has automatically disengaged the APU, which is why it's lit back up saying the APU is on but we're not using it. So then at that point we can turn the APU off, we can turn the APU bleed off. We can switch the packs to auto now. Oh, this is the signal to the plug-in that does the pushback. We can turn the packs to auto, which kicks in with the cabin pressurization and air temperature control. We can turn on the taxi lights if it's getting dark, which it is outside. And that's it, folks. We're ready to go. So if we just switch over quickly and see where we are on Little Nav Map at this point.
Tow is disconnected and bypass pin has been removed. Hand signal on the right. We'll see you next time, and have a safe flight.
Okay, great. So at this point you would be calling ground to request taxi clearance, and you would be on your way. So you would probably be, November, hold up Bravo 1. So we're not going to bother with any of that, but we'll taxi down and we'll just see what happens on the way out. So I'm going to start taxiing. On the way, I'm going to move the flaps to the takeoff configuration, which is 5 degrees, which is what I programmed into the FMC. There's no other traffic around, by the way. I'm not having to look around, and the ground isn't having to advise me about holding anywhere. So follow the lines down to runway 26 left. In the real world, we would hold short. We wouldn't carry straight on out to the runway. Does that make sense? We would inform Tower we're holding short, and then they would give us clearance to line up on the runway. But we're not doing that. We're just going straight onto the runway because there's no traffic in the game being simulated. We're out here on our own in the universe. There's a bit of a bug in the game there when it gets to a halt. Okay, so we can now go and turn the auto throttle on. And we're lined up on the runway. So here's a bit of a trick. So as soon as we take the parking brake off, which I've just done, we can go and press the N1 button and the aircraft will completely take over. So we just need to control attitude until we get to a few hundred feet. I think it's 800 feet is where you can do it from. So I'm going to look sideways slightly. Steer gently on the runway.
80 knots.
So auto throttle's on, we're in N1 mode. So we've been told to rotate. So we pull up to about a 15-degree climb. I'll just get rid of that window. It says, oh, why do things always pop up when you don't want them to? Yeah, now I've gone too steep because I was being... Okay, so now I can press autopilot. Now I can, I've pressed it slightly too early. And by pressing autopilot, and I can press LNAV mode, which will put it into the following the plan. By pressing autopilot, has automatically switched the auto throttle from N1 to speed mode. So N1 basically accelerated the aircraft to its limits for its takeoff configuration. You know, for the parameters I programmed into the FMC. And from this point on, the aircraft is following our instructions. So we could use, if I programmed everything in, we could use VNAV mode as well, and obviously it would follow the vertical path through the first few waypoints of the journey. So gear up. I should have put gear up earlier. We can start raising flaps. We can increase the speed here. Again, your speeds and climb rates in a full flight plan, you would have had it all programmed in, and I haven't done any of that, so that's why it's being a little bit random at the moment. So we've got a few drops of rain. We can turn on the windscreen wipers onto intermittent.
1,000 to go.
So we're climbing up towards 6,000 feet, 220 knots. So at this point, yeah, it's just basically monitoring the aircraft against the flight plan and following instructions from air traffic control if you have air traffic control, which I don't. I'm just doing this as an example. In reflection, I should have had the gear up as soon as we came off the runway. I guess that dialog box completely threw me. Obviously, you don't get dialog boxes popping up in a real airplane. But there you go. So hopefully this was interesting, and hopefully it showed you some of the procedures and it's of interest to people. So I'm just going to raise the flaps the rest of the way and increase to 250 knots. Again, there would be a conversation going on between the aircraft and air traffic control, and you might get clearance up to 10,000 at this point. Or it depends, if it's in your standard instrument departure, you would just be following that. So I could say, I want to climb 2,500 feet a minute up to 10,000 feet. So I'm doing this manually, but if you had it programmed in, you could just hit VNAV or do a flight level change even. But again, they're whole other subjects really to get into that are nothing to do with operating the cockpit. It's all to do with programming the flight plan in detail, and that's a couple of hours all on its own, to be honest. So there you go. I'm going to stop the video there with the airplane quite happily following its flight plan out of Gatwick on its way to Edinburgh. So I'll speak to you again soon. Oh, one more thing. The other thing I completely forgot about, I haven't turned on the traffic collision avoidance system. So you would typically do this as you're taking off, and what it does, you can see it's put a dotted line around the airplane. The reason it does it is if an airplane comes within that radius, the alarms go off, basically to warn you of an impending possible collision. Obviously I've got nothing in the air with me, which is why I completely forgot about it, but if you've got other airplanes around, it's really useful, especially if they're not watching what they're doing. and then you're going into your airspace. We can change this. We can have a look at it and see what the departure looks like. I think I've shown this before, where you can put this display into plan mode, and then you get in the legs page you get the step button, so you can step through. People quite often have asked me how you can jump ahead to a different step in the flight plan. It's actually pretty straightforward. If you go to the legs page, it works in exactly the same way. I've got insufficient fuel, by the way, look, because I didn't put enough fuel in for the flight. But you can manipulate the leg you're flying towards in exactly the same way that you can manipulate the route when you're removing discontinuities. Say I wanted to go straight to Haven from here, all I have to do is select Haven and then select the top one, and it will move it up. I have to execute it first, but it's done it, look, and it's reprogrammed my route, and the aeroplane is starting to turn straight towards Haven. So I've cut off 3 or 4 waypoints straight out of the departure route, and the plane's turning for Haven. So if I pull that up on the map, you can see what's going on. So that whole wiggly standard instrument departure has now gone. So there you go. It's pretty straightforward to jump waypoints. Obviously, while you're flying as well, you might want to insert a waypoint in which case you put in the name of a waypoint that isn't in the list and put it on top of another one to push that one down. So you can insert waypoints in the same manner. Okay, right, I really am going to stop the video this time, because again, you could go on all day about this sort of stuff. Right, that'll do.